those of us who like studying this sort of thing.
How big is this snow patch?
As we speak, it's probably in the region of about 3 metres wide. So that's how critical it's getting.
But normally, I guess it would be a lot bigger than it is right now if it's on the point of melting.
Yeah, that's right. Normally, at this time of the year, it would be far larger. It probably would strike us listeners in New Zealand as odd when you've got huge amounts of glaciers over there, massive sizes that we're talking, and worrying about a little patch of snow, which is a few metres wide. But because our hills are far smaller than the ones in New Zealand, we have to content ourselves with dirty little patches of snow which persist from year to year.
Now, when has it previously disappeared?
It's melted, we think, half a dozen times since 1700s. The first time in recorded history that it was known to melt was 1933. Now, it was such an unusual event back then that the Scottish Mountaineering Club wrote a letter to the Times of London to say that this is an extraordinary thing which has happened and the likes of which we're unlikely to see ever again, because they thought it was such an unusual occurrence that it ought to be recorded. And so they did. Little did they know that the same thing would happen in 1959. And then it remained for quite a number of years until 1996, where it disappeared. And then it disappeared in 2003 and then 2006. And it looks highly likely it's going to disappear again. So you can see that the rate of melt has accelerated in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. So it's becoming more frequent.
When do you think it might return?
Normally, the first fall of snow in Scotland on the high hills, the first decent fall, is generally in mid-October, mid to late October. It can be a bit earlier, it can be a bit later, but normally October is when we can see it return. And hopefully, it'll be many years before we have to worry about it disappearing again.
That's snow expert Ian Cameron speaking to us from Scotland. Not much time for feedback, but a little bit here. This one in talking about our earlier panel where we were talking about early voting. Give that rock and roll girl the top electoral commission job. She's a visionary and has an important voice, says one texter. Just a reminder, of course, that you can't enrol on the day. You've got to enrol beforehand. You've got till Friday. We're back tomorrow.
The Ferry Priam, Titi Wainui, RNZ National.
RNZ News at 9 o'clock. Good morning, I'm Nicola Wright. Scores are dead and others are trapped in burning buildings following this morning's 7.1 magnitude earthquake in Mexico. The governor of the central state of Morelos says 42 people are known to have died there. 5 others died in Mexico State and 2 in Puebla after a school collapsed. The Mexican president, Enrique Peña Nieto, says 27 buildings have collapsed in the capital. A New Zealander who lives in Mexico City says the quake was full on. Jay Krishnan was at home when the tremor struck.
In an apartment on the second floor, probably within about 3 minutes of the quake finishing, I actually went out onto the street and ran down to my daughter's school. And I ran through plumes of dust and the smell of ash and lots and lots of people in the street.
Jay Krishnan says a 6-storey building on his corner is now reduced to about 2 storeys. The Auckland Chamber of Commerce says much of the disruption caused by the fuel shortage could have been avoided by better infrastructure planning in the city. At least 3,000 Auckland air travellers are expected to have their flights cancelled today after a rupture shut the fuel pipeline from Marsden Point. Auckland Airport's fuel supply has been cut to a third of its usual levels. The Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Michael Barnett says since 2012, the amount of fuel in storage has not changed, despite demand increasing by 30%.
To me, it's something we could have planned for, we could have managed better. We didn't have to have this inconvenience. We didn't have to have people disadvantaged, freight disadvantaged, international reputation damaged.
Michael Barnett from the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. Kim Campbell from the Employers and Manufacturers Association says it's unreasonable to expect 100% resilience and the situation will be fixed soon. Rangatahi Māori are more likely than any other age group to be registered on the Māori roll. Almost 34,000 18 to 24-year-olds are enrolled to vote, followed by over 27,000 25 to 29-year-olds. Jo Cameron, a teacher at Te Wharekura o Moao in Tauranga, says she knows the rangatahi are interested in politics and keen to take part.
These kids are talking about the elections, they're talking about the parties, they're talking about what various leaders have said they'll do for Māori and what promises may have been broken, and they want to participate.
Jo Cameron says the process of enrolling and voting is unfamiliar to many rangatahi and there are obstacles to them taking part. New Zealand Post says it's in discussions with a former Hamilton postie who says she was bullied and terrorised for 8 months by her supervisor. Jessica Peebles says the harassment included 2 death threats. Ms Peebles says New Zealand Post acknowledged she was subjected to ongoing bullying and upheld the allegation of the first death threat. But despite this, she was expected to continue working with the supervisor.
I would cry on the way to work. I would cry every day because, and the main reason for my tears was because the big boss was doing nothing about it. And I told her and I told her and I told her. And that, I mean, yes, I was getting picked on, but the main reason for my tears was because I felt alone.
Jessica Peebles, who left the company last week, says she worries about her former colleagues still working in the delivery branch in Hamilton. Paragliders and hang gliders are being urged to report dangerous flying. 2 paragliders died during the 3 months to June. 2 more were seriously injured. The Civil Aviation Authority says it has serious concerns at the high number of accidents during the autumn quarter, which included 3 fatal microlight crashes. The Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association's president, Evan Lamberton, says they want to create a more open reporting system in which fellow pilots and members of the public can report pilots flying dangerously.
2 fatalities that happen in one season is something of a concern, which makes us look again. What we know about these 2 incidents is that in both cases the pilots were pursuing activities that we would generally consider to be at the higher risk end of what we do.
Evan Lamberton, the president of the Hang Gliding and Paragliding Association. That's the news.
Hello, I'm John Campbell.
And I'm Guyan Espiner. Radio New Zealand has been delivering election results for decades, the first Kiwi broadcaster to do so.
And this year we're taking it to a whole new level.
We'll be available on 7 media platforms.
You can catch us on RNZ National, RNZ's website, rnz.co.nz, and through the Morning Report and Checkpoint Facebook pages and YouTube.
And yes, we are on the telly on Freeview Channel 50 and Face TV on Sky Channel 83.
Our team of top political reporters will be broadcasting from right around the country.
And from the University of Auckland's television studio, I'll be joined by a heavyweight team of political exponents and expert observers to dissect the results and call the shots.
It's game on, so bring it in close. We're on the radio and the website.
On the Morning Report and Checkpoint Facebook pages and on YouTube.
For Election17, join us at 5 to 7 this coming Saturday night here on RNZ National.
And on the telly.
The forecast from Met Service to midnight now, Northland to Kapiti, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the central high country. Mainly fine, but morning cloud in Taihape and isolated showers for Northland and Taranaki. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington mostly fine. However, isolated showers becoming confined to the ranges this morning. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland cloud at times. A few showers turning to rain overnight. Marlborough and Canterbury, areas of low cloud and patchy drizzle for coastal Marlborough and Canterbury, chiefly morning and night. Otago and Southland mainly fine, but cloud and 1 or 2 coastal showers for Otago. Chatham Islands cloudy, 1 or 2 showers. 9:06 on RNZ National. News and weather again at 10.
Ata Marie and welcome to 9 to Noon. I'm Kathryn Ryan with you through till midday this Wednesday. First this morning, very soon we will welcome the National Party leader Bill English as he is in to make his case for this Saturday's election. Tomorrow I will speak with the Labour Party leader Jacinda Ardern. And you can view both those videos if you wish. They will be live streamed on RNZ's website, on RNZ's Facebook page and on Freeview Channel 50. Just on the radio after that, however, and as Donald Trump has delivered a speech to the United Nations General Assembly threatening North Korea with total destruction should it take action on the United States or its interests, Kim Jong-un has warned he will only accelerate his nuclear program if more sanctions are imposed. Our guest is the North Korea specialist at Tufts University in Boston, Sung-Yoon Lee. Australia correspondent Peter Munro is with us after that, talking about the divisions over the same-sex marriage postal survey, changes to media ownership laws designed to help media companies survive in the internet age, and also questions being asked over the future of Australia's iconic and unusual oversized tourist attractions, such as the Big Banana, the Big Worm and the Big Prawn. After 10, the sounds and stories told by trees. Our featured guest is Professor of Biology and Environmental Studies at the University of the South in Tennessee, David Haskell. He spent 2 years visiting 12 trees around the world for a new book, The Songs of Trees, which explores everything about them, including what they sound like and the many ways trees and humans are connected. He's used some pretty high-tech gear to hear how they sound. David has examined a palm on the Barrier Island in the state of Georgia, an ordinary-looking pear tree in Manhattan, an ancient hazel tree which has turned into an archaeological charcoal, and a bonsai pine which survived the Hiroshima bombing. We should say he was Pulitzer Prize nominated for an earlier book. He is an extraordinary naturalist, poet and writer. Paul Diamond is along with the book for review. He's been reading He Reo Wahine, Māori Women Voices in Colonial New Zealand by Lockie Patterson and Angela Wanhola. Part 13 of The Changeover by Margaret Mahi will be read for us by Miranda Harcourt about 11:15. After 11, Graham Downs with part 2 of this year's Silver Scrolls finalists, and he'll be playing Big Runga, Aldous Harding and The Great Unwashed. Then a Northland community supporting its own sexual abuse survivors. Kaitaia-based trauma therapist Karen Torrington co-founded the support service Indigo House and is herself a survivor of sexual harm. Science commentator Susie Wiles on this year's Ig Nobel Prizes. They're a hardy annual. She has new research showing how squirrels remember where they've stored their nuts. And also we'll be talking about blocking the immune system, excuse me, to stop evening drinking. It is 9 minutes past 9, nearly 10 minutes past 9. Please excuse me. And you are listening to 9 to Noon. Well, good morning and welcome. And this morning, first on 9 to Noon, we welcome the National Party leader, Bill English. He is here for the first of our interviews with the leaders of the two biggest political parties. Tomorrow at the same time, we will welcome Jacinda Ardern, leader of the Labour Party. Well, the polls are tight. They indicate that National is likely to lead or to need a partner if it is to lead the next government. Most likely it is going to need the support of New Zealand First. Its partners in its previous government have been the Māori Party, United Futures departing leader Peter Dunn, and of course ACT 1 MP. Bill English entered Parliament in 1990. He's held a number of roles, including as the incoming Finance Minister, as the GFC or the global financial crisis hit in 2008. And he became leader of the National Party and indeed Prime Minister some 9 months ago with the surprise resignation of John Key. Mr English, good morning and welcome to 9 to Noon.
Good morning, Kathryn.
We focused on some key areas in our question line this morning, and at the end there'll be an opportunity for you to cite whatever you wish from your record or your party's manifesto that you wish to highlight as the case for the party's election. You've talked about building on success, about New Zealand being confident, successful, outward-looking. We're getting ahead. Is that true for many New Zealanders, but not so for an increasing number of New Zealanders?
It gives us the capacity to bring along an increasing number of New Zealanders. For instance, if you take someone like a sole parent on benefit, since we've had surpluses, we've been able to extend more support. So 1st of April last year, $25 a week increase in their benefit rate. If they've got a couple of kids, 1st of April next year, another $30 to $35 on top of that, along with accommodation assistance. We're also going to extend free GP visits to another, $18 GP visits to another 600,000 people, reduce child poverty by 30% on the 1st of April next year. That's currently legislated. These are all the opportunities we have including with our social investment toolkit, to really get down one by one with families and individuals to crack the long-term social problems.
I wish to come back to social investment, but I'm talking about most New Zealanders, working New Zealanders. Is it too hard for an increasing number of New Zealanders to even start building assets, especially equity in a house, and who can't see how their incomes versus their outgoings are going to get them there?
What we've seen is a pattern of moderate but consistent increases in income. You know, the minimum wage has gone up $8,000 a year in the last 9 years. The average wage has gone up $13,000. That's at twice the rate of inflation. So inflation's been very low. You've seen these moderate but consistent gains in incomes. And then with respect to, say, getting into the housing market, 30,000 people have already used the Home Start support. We announced a package the other day, another 80,000 over the next 4 years. Some of them with a grant of up to $30,000 from government will be able to get in. And that relies on the ongoing strength of the economy. But I can tell you this, if you're concerned about people's incomes, then the answer is not more tax and more government spending.
We'll talk about tax in a moment. Here's your problem. Housing costs in Auckland, we've seen the median house price surpass 10 times the Auckland household income. Nationally, QV figures have the average house price at $630,000. At the same time, we have seen rents go up, not surprisingly, in step. The wage growth that you're talking about has nowhere near kept pace. Your former finance spokesman and leader, Don Brash, says it will take 50 years for wages to catch up, or we need a 60% house price reduction.
Well, look, that's a pretty dramatic description of it, I have to say.
He's a former Reserve Bank governor and a former finance spokesman.
The house prices are now flat to falling. And as I said, 30,000 first-home buyers got in remarkably, even in these high house prices. 80,000 we expect will, because we want people to be able to get into those houses. We've worked intensively over recent years to change the way that councils operate with the availability of land, because the fundamental problem, particularly here in Auckland, was that when the demand came on, 150,000 Kiwis who we thought would leave in the last 5 years but stayed home. That's extra pressure in the market. The market took too long to react. Now the supply is there, and we're in the biggest construction boom that New Zealand's seen in decades, both for housing and the supporting infrastructure.
The government's own pipeline report, construction pipeline report, shows you're not keeping up. And the problem is the horse is bolted. And could you not have done anything on the demand side? Could you not have addressed immigration in some ways? Could you not have brought in a CGT? Could you not have banned overseas buyers, for example? Could you not have done anything to manage demand until supply caught up?
And a number of steps were taken. The bright line test on flipping the houses for speculation. The LVRs came in from the Reserve Bank. That was, I oversaw that process. The requirements, the tax requirements around foreigners were significantly upgraded. But and that's all had an effect on demand. This is why prices are flat to falling. We've seen it happen in Christchurch, where the supply expanded rapidly after the earthquake. Prices falling there. Here they're flat to falling. And you don't want a drastic adjustment, because this is people's main asset. What you do want is an economy that's growing, that is going to continue to lift incomes.
The problem is we have the situation we have now. And on that note, for those most in need, why do we have 4,000 net fewer state houses than we did in 2015? In 2,000 years, and I've got the stats here, 4,000 net fewer. Why, when you saw this problem coming, were you not investing in ensuring there was a sufficient supply of housing for the most vulnerable?
Well, we have been, and we've changed the social housing system. So the numbers that are used about housing New Zealand-owned houses are only part. They're still a major part, but they're not all the social houses that are available. For instance, Tamaki Redevelopment Company is not counted there, but it's got 2,500 social houses. We now call them social houses. Others have come into the market, several thousand. So that supply is expanding. We spend $2 billion a year now underpinning rentals. 60% of all rentals in New Zealand are subsidised by government, and that has grown as the rentals have grown. On the 1st of April next year, accommodation assistance, particularly in South and West Auckland, will grow quite significantly, because some of those families will get over $100 a week more assistance because their rents have gone up. And as the economy expands, the industry tell us they're going about as fast as they can at 10,000 a year. Slashing migration is going to make it very difficult to build the houses and the roads that we need to accommodate a growing economy and a growing population.
This is the situation that we're in then. So let's look at a possible response looking forward. I ask again, is New Zealand becoming divided between people who've got assets, good equity in a house or houses, and a good income, and people who might have a good income, they might be professionals, but can't get onto the ladder? Is that the situation people are talking about in this election right now?
And the growing economy is going to improve that as incomes rise, as the houses get built. If you take the example of the people trying to get into the housing market, combination of the Home Start upgraded package and the Welcome Home loans means that a couple who've been in five years in KiwiSaver with no other savings will be able to put down a deposit on a $600,000 house. Now, 18% of Auckland sales in the last year were under $600,000, so the opportunity is there. But again, taking more tax off them, creating uncertainty around capital gains tax and so on. That is going to slow things down, and they'll go backwards.
Let's talk about the tax system, because I'm very interested in that. A lot has changed, and has your thinking changed at all about whether a different approach might now be needed to the tax system, whether it is still fair, whether it is still delivering?
Oh, we have one of the best tax systems in the world. It's fair, it's very consistent. Everyone pays pretty much the statutory rate that they're meant to pay. There's very few opportunities for avoidance. It's part of what has enabled the growth and certainty in this economy, because people are now focusing on expanding the businesses, employing, exporting, rather than trying to avoid tax.
It's not fundamentally changed since the 1980s. Not fundamentally since the 1980s, where the tax scale was flattened, the top rates came down, GST was introduced. Is it time, after all these decades, to look at things like asset taxes? A period of low interest rates has helped fuel those house price rises, massively relative to earned income. Is it time to look at, say, asset taxes of a kind? Will you do that? At least explore it if you get another term.
No, we won't. We believe the tax system as it is works now, rewards effort, and you can see the uncertainty that's created when you've got the Labour Party unwilling to actually say clearly what they want to do.
I'll talk to them tomorrow about deed tax. Are you saying you're not even prepared to look at what has been a subject of some discussion around this election, which is whether some kind of asset taxes should be introduced, or indeed, moving on to the next subject of discussion, some kind of environmental or externality taxes? Why should taxpayers clean up after polluters making a profit out of their activities?
Well, there's been an enormous amount of work go on with the environmental impact, particularly in the rural areas, and people there are now grappling with extensive investment to mitigate environmental impact, nutrient limits that have been set catchment by catchment, a national measurement system. We believe that technology that changes farming practice is going to be much more helpful than what has been a randomly proposed tax just on one group, which doesn't actually relate to the environmental impact.
You're not interested in looking at asset taxes in any kind, whether people who have built their assets and have built their wealth should now be contributing relative to what is taken out of the pay packets of people who are struggling to build those assets. You're not interested in looking at that, even as a matter of exploration.
Well, look at who is the largest group of asset holders, superannuitants. And they don't have large incomes. They pay rates as local body tax now. If you're going to bring in wealth taxes, that's one of the biggest single problems with them, is that often you're levying the tax on older people who hold assets, have low cash incomes and can't pay it. Look, if the opposition parties want to be clear about their proposing, then they can remove the uncertainty about their plans.
The state of the waterways has become a significant concern. And you've talked a lot about fencing and actions that farmers have taken, and I've acknowledged that. I think NIWA itself would say of the waterways that it has monitored or wants to be fenced, a very large proportion are now fenced. But what about issues of nutrient loads going straight through the soil? Are you prepared to explore limits on herd numbers in vulnerable catchments, or indeed to signal to regional councils, by which you have the power, to signal to them to up the game on trying to manage those limits?
Well, look, this question's about 2 or 3 years behind where activity is up to. That's been going on for 2 or 3 years.
No. I'm not talking about the fencing. I'm talking about the herd numbers as they are in one catchment in Canterbury, up 200%, and that's before a new irrigation scheme has come online. What direction are you signalling through your environmental national policy statements to regional councils about your expectations? Any?
Oh, that's all been signalled. We've had a land and water forum for 5 or 6 years working through all those issues. Look, some political parties have just discovered this issue.
That land and water forum, people have been peeling off it. Most of its recommendations have not been acted on by the government. It has cherry-picked a few.
No, that is simply not correct. A couple of environmental groups of Forest and Bird and Fish and Game left in the last 12 months, probably for political reasons. But if you go to the rural areas where the waterways actually are, you'll meet the people who are the stewards of the environment, who've lived it, loved it, farmed it for 150 years, and it's sustainable, and they know that they are now working on the next round of intensive change in farm management. And the debate ahead of us is what happens when the national measuring system, which has all been agreed, now in place, will show, as it does now, that water pollution levels in urban areas are about twice as high as they are in rural areas. And that is why this national conversation is so important. This is about what people value as Kiwis.
What's the national conversation as far as you can see it?
About raising the quality of our fresh water across the board. With these last 6 or 7 years, been a strong focus in rural areas. It's going to move to urban areas. Here in Auckland, 160 days a year, stormwater and sewage spill into the harbour in a way that you'd be prosecuted for in a rural area. So that debate's ahead of us.
What are you going to do about it?
Well, we've promulgated the national policy statement, which had to go through an extensive consultation process, including with iwi. Everyone has to pay attention to that now. It's on the books. It is the direction, and councils are getting to grips with it. That's why we're discussing with them about how, for instance, they're going to invest in infrastructure over the next 5 years to fix the problem.
On the question of Labour's proposed water tax, which you've been very vocal in your opposition about, but the government that you've led has been working on a pricing regime for water itself. And does that mean, in principle, you believe a price of some kind needs to happen?
What's been discussed at length now for 5 or 6 years is how to change the allocation system. The historical system is first come, first serve. So if you've got if you're in an area and you got the rights 50 years ago, then you keep hold of them. In fact, the big power generators have a lot of those kind of historical rights. Changing the allocation system is largely about tradability. That is, can the person with the highest value use of the water, who can accommodate the environmental impact, can they get to use it? So what you're seeing, for instance, is, I'll just give you an example. Central North Island has been a concern, big dairy conversions there. Now a process underway of moving to sheep milking, because that has a much lower environmental impact. Well, you'd want to make sure that new use could get access to the water that previous users have.
All right, what we have seen is, for example, the tannery that closed down in North Canterbury, and that is now, by looks of it, being lined up, those water rights, to be turned into a water bottling export business. So, 2 points. First, you did commission the Ministry for the Environment, I beg your pardon, you did commission some look into whether or not there should be a royalty charge on bottled water. You announced that earlier in the year. And second, the work programme we're talking about on freshwater allocation does talk about pricing mechanisms to improve efficiencies. Will that tradable water right be the limit of it? Or are you looking at going further and a possible price on water more broadly, and particularly on water use?
The work that's been going on is focusing on the tradability, because we also have the other, probably more important tradability actually, is the tradability in nutrient allocation, like the ability to leach nitrates. That's been tried here in New Zealand, world leading, was over the last 6 or 7 years. We're smart enough with these tools to maintain our position as a high value food producer, reach the quality of fresh water Kiwis expect, at the same time. It's not an either-or thing, and that's where we dispute the debate.
That's not what people are perceiving over the last decade as they have watched the water quality decline. On that question of water and who owns water, why not given it may well be one of the most valuable resource of the 21st century, and we're seeing a great interest in bottling it and sending it off in plastic bottles overseas for private profits, why not bite the bullet and address the question of who owns water differently, or at least inquire into it? Are you looking at that? Are you looking at whether we should be charging royalties as we would if this were oil or minerals?
No, because it's not a finite resource in a lot of ways. There has been a discussion about iwi rights and interests for the last 5 or 6 years, and extensive discussion. And it's been clear from that discussion that iwi would certainly contest the idea that the Crown owned the water. So if you were going to set a levy, you have to do so on some legal basis, that you are the person who should collect it. Now, that's why the levy on water bottling is a bit problematic, because as soon as a government asserts that, Māori will contest it, there's no doubt about that, and look for some kind of settlement or some legal declaration that they're the owners.
It was the National Party that advanced so many treaty claims, particularly under Doug Graham and Jim Bolger. It was the National Party that completed the Sea Lords deal, which has been an important source of economic development for Māori. Why not be the leader who sorts this out, establishes what, if any, interests Māori have in water, and have iwi receiving the profits from sending our water overseas in plastic bottles, and not private companies, potentially increasingly overseas owned? Why not be the person who does that?
Well, we have been doing that. You referred to the settlements under Doug Graham and Jim Bolger. A lot more have been done in the last 9 years.
You just told me as soon as you got into this issue of the ownership of water and sorting that out, possibly with a fully informed and given time inquiry, you have just told me as soon as that happens, Māori will challenge it. And I'm saying to you, OK, let's deal with it. Let's do it.
I'll tell you how we are dealing with it, and it's been pretty successful. When you boil down Māori rights and interests, they are highly localised. That is, this group of people, this iwi, sometimes this hapu, have a relationship that they'll assert with this particular water body, and we've been able to come to agreements, including in the many treaty settlements we've done, dozens of them, which involve this. The Waikato River is the most high-profile one, where we now have the Waikato River Board. Tainui are big participants in that. The issue we maintain everyone owns the water. Another way of putting it, no one owns the water. The clean-up of the Waikato is well underway, backed by a $300 million fund. Now, that's dealing with the interests the issues New Zealanders want dealt with on a basis agreed by iwi.
OK, the government's books are in good shape relative to most countries in the world. Headline GDP growth anyway, GDP per capita not so much. Government or public debt, unemployment rates, interest rates. All right, you've talked about building on that. How? What will be different about the economy or about the expenditure of the fruits of that economy if you're re-elected? What will be different from the last 9 years?
Well, just the growing confidence in the economy and the investment we see going in. I've been visiting businesses all through the campaign. It's just amazing to see what's going on there. The growth in jobs, that continues. We've got the highest proportion of people of working age in the workforce than we've ever had. It's going to be hard for that to change because it's already so high. What we can do, though, is get more people at the margin of the workforce in, one by one, if that's what it takes, and that's what we're actually doing. We're going to see further diversification of our export base because you've got certainty, you've got confidence, and that investment is happening.
Many are saying that debt has been brought down at the expense of underinvestment in health, and particularly in mental health, at the underinvestment of other aspects of government expenditure, for example, in the special needs area of education, an area that I would have thought aligned very closely with your social investment approach. There has simply not been enough funds spent, and equally, arguably, on some major infrastructure as well. Are you going to spend more in these areas if re-elected, or is it going to be the same, steady as she goes, tight purse management?
We'll be spending more, and this is the bit that really matters, with a strong focus on getting better results, particularly for individuals. So if you take an area like disability services, which overlaps with learning support or special needs, whatever you call it, where we need to get a much more individualised focus. Now, we've got programs like Enabling Good Lives, which is currently being designed with the disability sector, because this is what changes people's lives.
I know,
throwing the money around.
You've talked social investment. You've talked social investment for years, but where do we see the actual investing? At the same time, so many services that are about helping people out of dysfunction are short of funds. Drug and alcohol services, NGOs like the family violence provider Shakti running out of funds and closing its doors. The Sally Army lost its DHB funding for helping gang members off P because the Ministry of Health wouldn't fund it. So we talk about the principle, but where's the investment being?
Okay, well, look, the picture you're painting, I think, is quite misleading, because what we're doing is changing the way the funding is applied. You've got, there's been, for instance, there's been big increase in drug and alcohol rehabilitation, particularly in our prisons. So if you go and look at the corrections budget for this, you'll see it's the rehabilitation budget's like 300% more than it used to be, because now we've got a strong focus on reducing recidivism when the prisoners go out, reducing it. We focus on groups of people where there's similar need that have been pretty much invisible. I'll tell you about a group I came across the other day. Work being done in one of our provincial cities where they found 37 people with over 1,000 criminal convictions. Now, that 1,000 criminal convictions in 37 households. Now, we are going to deal with that one by one, because when you change those households, you change the community.
It's the going to that I'm drawing attention to. In 2011, you memorably called prisons a moral and fiscal failure.
Yes.
I've never heard anyone disagree with that. The muster is the highest it's ever been, and you're flagging another 500 beds for Waikaria prison. So the talk has been there. But again, I could go on. Special needs, needs funding in schools. There are waiting lists. There are kids who could get intervention at 5 and 6 and 7. The money has been there, but not in that budget, not allocated to that purpose.
And
have you been too tight?
No, it takes time to change the system. So look, with special needs, I absolutely understand what the parents are on about. I've had the experience of it myself. I know what it feels like to have endless assessments and not enough actually happening. Now, there's been a lot more money go into that area, a few million extra teacher aid hours, for instance. But what they need to, what people want there, as there's been intensive consultation over the last couple of years under Hekia Parata, previously as Minister of Education, is the much more individualised, responsive services. Now, I'll tell you where we have been getting results. This morning, 60,000 fewer kids woke up in a benefit-dependent household than 5 years ago. We have the lowest number of sole parents on benefit than we've had since the early 80s. The number of sole parents under 20 was 4,300 9 years ago. Today, it's 1,800. We are dealing with those young women one by one, and we have a great opportunity as we get through this election to take that social investment system and really gear it up.
I'm conscious of time. Sorry to cut you off. A couple of more points here. On climate change, National's position for some years has been not to introduce policies that harm the economy, don't get ahead of what others are doing. New Zealand's too small to make a big difference anyway. What is your position on climate change policy if elected for another term? Is it going to be situation same?
We have signed up to the Paris Agreement. And they are quite challenging targets for New Zealand. We've got the emissions trading system in place, as with the multi-party support. The Labour and the Green government early 2000s invented it. It's the best way to change.
It was undermined by allowing the trading of junk international credits that brought the price back to about $12.
Well, it was actually down to $2, and now it's back up to 17 and rising. Because we're removing the 2-for-1 trade-off. So that is the main mechanism.
Your opponents are talking about being carbon-free by mid-century. That is a very big call. And I guess the underlying question to you is this. Are you the leader and is your party the government for the problems of the 21st century racing down the barrel at us right now?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, is that leadership, that target that you have put forward and the way that's been met over the last 9 years, is that leadership on climate change? Because you sense a mood is looking for that.
It's the Paris Agreement. It's the international standard.
It's an agreement you've made, and many have argued, and got a court case being brought against you by a talented young law student saying you're not meeting our obligations with the policies that you are introducing.
Well, look, some people would like to go further. Look, that's absolutely right.
And are you missing that desire to go further.
No,
Look, there was a
we're going
TVNZ
about it.
Colmar
We're
Brunton
going
poll
about it
last
in
week.
the-
There was a TVNZ Colmar Brunton poll last week that asked about what the priorities for government expenditure on transport should be. 64% said the priority should be public transport. 32% said roads.
Okay,
You've been
so-
building roads and roads and roads.
Well,
Are you missing the mood?
You are within a few hundred metres of the largest public transport project New Zealand's ever seen, the Central Rail Link.
Promoted by Lead and Brown ad nauseum until your government finally agreed to bring forward funding to it.
We've come up with the money and got the agreement with Auckland Council about how it's going to happen. It's going to double the capacity of the rail the rail network across Auckland. We set a target for the electric vehicles, but look, 90% of trips are on roads. And projects like the Woodaview Tunnel aren't just infrastructure. I spoke to, when I went down to the opening there, spoke to someone actually at the airport the other day who works at the airport and said it gave them almost an hour a day extra with their children because they had to drive from west to airport.
More roads.
Well, there's a $10 billion plan, 10-year plan, 27 billion of transport projects across Auckland and significant investment around the regions. But this is the growth. You see, no one imagined, for instance, 5 or 6 years ago,
because they don't have a practical alternative.
No one imagined 6 or 7 years ago that in Hawke's Bay there'd be sufficient growth that you need to 4-lane the Napier-Hastings Road. That's the practical thing they need there. They can't wait round for light rail in Hawke's Bay. So we've got to get, our approach to all this is to build the confidence in this growing economy, to invest to support the activity, the businesses, the organisations, the families, to lift their incomes in a practical way. And the fact is, most people drive cars.
Right. Is there anything else you wish to cite on any subject we've missed to make the case for your re-election on Saturday?
Oh, there's a pretty fundamental choice here. We want to build on the strength of the New Zealand economy. It gives us the opportunity, a generational opportunity, to spread the benefits right across the community, to lift our environmental standards because we'll be able to afford to, and we want to, and it reinforces New Zealand's brand. To dig into our toughest social problems, where we now have one of the best toolkits in the world, some real progress. We're going to be able to reduce child poverty by 30% on the 1st of April next year, and we've set the target to reduce it by another 30% within 2 or 3 years. And that's the other important thing here.
Wait, I can't help but say this. Why the next 3 years? You've had 9 years. Why is it 30% in the next budget?
Because we built the surpluses that give us the capacity to do it. We didn't used to have the capacity.
You've been building them for some time. It's a decade since the GFC, and we ran up $70 billion worth of debt.
Well, Kathryn, you make it sound easy, but actually we've only had surpluses the last 2 or 3 years, and we've been able to do things. Look, 55,000 of our lowest paid, hardest working women, we got a pay settlement for them from the 1st of July. They've just had a 20% plus pay increase. That's $2 billion over the next few years. If we maintain the strength of this economy, we can keep making those kinds of decisions that have high impact on our community. We're in one of the best positions in the developed world to do this. The alternative is a grab bag of economic policies that all failed in the past, which will slow the economy, reduce the surpluses, grow the debt.
With the leader tomorrow.
And
Thank you
have
for your
such
time.
a positive opportunity.
Thank you for your time. Bill English is the leader of the National Party. Thank you,
Kathryn.
It is 20 minutes to 10 on 9 to noon. Well, obviously the rhetoric is heating up very much on the Korean Peninsula with Donald Trump's speech to the United Nations. Our next guest will be talking about what it is that North Korea wants.
It was just one of those things, just one of those crazy flings, one of those bells that now and then rings, just one of those nights, just one of those fabulous flights, a trip to the moon on gossamer wings, just one of those things. If we